The rain had begun as a mere drizzle, a whisper against the cracked pavement and worn cobblestones that made up the city's oldest quarter. But by the time Detective Elias Carr arrived at the crime scene, the downpour had grown into a relentless sheet of water, blurring the neon lights and casting the streets in a haze of smoky reflections. He pulled his trench coat tighter around his frame, the damp seeping into the fabric, chilling him despite the warmth of the cigarette glow between his fingers. The alley was narrow and claustrophobic, hemmed in by towering buildings whose dark windows stared like hollow eyes. At the center, a small makeshift shrine of yellow police tape cordoned off what should have been an ordinary scene. A man found dead, but Elias knew better. The city he walked was one built on stone, literally. Deaths were carved into tablets of granite or marble, permanent records that stood as immutable as the city walls themselves. Each tablet bore the weight of promises, failures, and the lives bound by them. And yet, here was a man whose death tablet had vanished without a trace. Elias crouched beside the empty pedestal where the stone ledger should have been. The surface was slick with rain, a thin sheen that mirrored the cloudy sky. It was as if the dead itself had been erased from existence, an unthinkable breach of the city's sacred order. He ran a gloved hand over the pedestal's cold, damp surface, feeling the rough grain of stone beneath his fingertips. The absence was a hollow void that spoke louder than any inscription could. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. The faint smell of wet stone mingled with the acrid scent of cigarette smoke and something darker, the faintest trace of oil or burnt rubber. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren wailed, cutting through the night's heavy silence. Elias rose, his mind already racing through possibilities that made his gut tighten. Detective Carr, a voice called from the edge of the scene. He turned to see a uniformed officer approaching, rain dripping from his cap. The victim's name is Harold Vance, prominent businessman. His tablet was confirmed on record this morning, but now, nothing. Elias nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. And no one saw anything. No one could have removed it without leaving a trace. Nothing, the officer replied grimly. It's like it never existed. The detective's gaze drifted upward to the looming facades around the alley, their stone walls etched with the countless deaths of the city's inhabitants. Each tablet was a testament to a story, some of hope, others of despair. They were meant to be eternal, unchanging, the very foundation of the city's justice. But tonight, that foundation had cracked. As Elias moved from the alley toward the victim's modest office building, the rhythmic patter of rain on stone accompanied his thoughts. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of old wood and ink. The walls bore rows of ledger shells, their contents thick with the weight of countless obligations, promises carved in permanence. He ran a hand over the spines of the heavy tomes, feeling the cold solidity that contrasted sharply with the fragility of human trust. Here, debts were not whispered rumors or forgotten IOUs. They were monuments, cold and unyielding as the city itself. Yet Harold Vance's tablet was gone, stolen from this very sanctum. And with it, a line had been crossed, one that threatened the balance Elias had long accepted, if not fully believed in. Outside, the rain continued to fall, each drop a tiny echo of the erasure unfolding beneath the city's surface. Elias lit another cigarette, the flame flickering briefly before succumbing to the damp air. He stared into the smoke curling from his lips, the tendrils twisting like the secrets he was about to unravel. The city was a ledger etched in stone, and now some of its stones were disappearing. The question was not just who had taken them, but why, and what debts remained, unpaid and unspoken, buried in shadows yet to be uncovered. He pocketed his lighter and stepped back into the night, the rain soaking through his coat as the first threads of dawn began to fray the darkness. Somewhere beneath the wet streets and broken promises, the truth waited, silent, waiting to be carved anew. Elias Carr was ready to dig beneath the surface. The stone had vanished, but the debt, he knew, would not stay erased for long. The rain had eased to a fine mist as Elias Carr stepped out of the neon haze and into the cavernous stone registry building. The heavy oak doors groaned shut behind him, muffling the city's restless pulse. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint, cold scent of carved stone. Rows upon rows of tablets lined the walls, each one etched with debts, some small and forgotten, others vast and crushing. The tablets glimmered faintly beneath the dim amber lights, their permanence a stark contrast to the fleeting lives they governed. Elias adjusted the collar of his worn trench coat and let his eyes wander over the ledger stones. Each was a story, a burden set in stone, immortalized until repaid. Yet the system was as much about memory as it was about power. Debts here were not just numbers. They were marks of shame, chains that bound the city's citizens in ways unseen, but deeply felt. He made his way to the front desk, where a middle-aged man, his graying hair combed back neatly, adjusted his spectacles and regarded Elias with a practiced neutrality. "Detective Carr," the man said, voice low and measured. "What brings you to the registry today?" Elias slid a folded photograph across the worn wooden counter. Murder investigation. The victim's debt tablet vanished hours before his death. "I need to understand how that's even possible." The clerk's eyes flickered momentarily, a brief flash of unease. Tablets vanish only when debts are fully repaid. It's the law. Any other disappearance is unprecedented and dangerous. "I'm not here to debate the law," Elias replied. "I want to know the process. How are these debts recorded and erased?" The man sighed, motioning for Elias to follow him deeper into the registry's shadowed halls. "Each debt is inscribed into the stone by our scribes, an art and a record. When a debtor repays, an official ceremony is held to erase the tablet, a ritual that ensures it vanishes without trace. It's a system built on permanence and trust." As they walked, Elias studied the solemn faces of officials and scribes, their movements precise and deliberate. The registry was a temple to accountability, but also a fortress of secrets. Later, outside the registry's imposing walls, Elias found refuge in the soft glow of a small bookstore nestled in a narrow alley Lena Marsh's domain. Inside, the scent of old paper and ink mingled with quiet determination. Lena looked up from a stack of yellowed newspapers as Elias entered. "Detective," she greeted, adjusting her glasses. "I've been expecting you." Elias nodded. "I need to know more about the victim. What was he involved in?" Lena's eyes darkened. "He was tangled in debts that stretched far beyond what the ledger shows. There's unrest brewing among the debtors, people who feel trapped, erased by a system that's supposed to protect them." She handed Elias a bundle of papers reports, rumors, whispers of ledger manipulations, and vanished tablets. "Be careful," she warned. "The deeper you dig, the more you risk." Elias felt the weight of her words settle like the stone tablets themselves, heavy, unyielding. The ledger system was more than a bureaucratic mechanism. It was a cage wrought in granite and shadows. Back at his office, Elias pored over the documents, tracing the lines between debts and disappearances. His stone pendant felt cold against his palm, a small talisman against the creeping darkness. The victim's vanished tablet was no accident. It was a fracture in the city's carefully carved order. The night deepened, and Elias knew the ledger's surface was only the beginning. Beneath it lay fractures, cracks in the stone that threatened to shatter everything. The city's debts were etched in permanence, but some stones, he realized, could be broken, and some debts could never truly be repaid. As dawn crept through the blinds, Elias lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his thoughts like the shadows he chased. Lena's words echoed in the silence. The ledger was not just a record. It was a weapon and a prison. He had to find the missing tablet, and with it, the truth buried beneath layers of stone and silence. The city's debts might be carved in granite, but Elias was determined to expose the cracks before the whole ledger crumbled. Outside, the city stirred, oblivious to the slow erosion of its foundation. But Elias Carr was awake, and the stone was starting to speak. The city's shadows were alive tonight, a wet chill crawling through the alleyways where stone met stone in a cold embrace. Detective Elias Carr pulled his trench coat tighter around his frame, the familiar weight of his stone pendant pressing against his chest like a talisman against the creeping darkness. The rain had eased to a dull whisper, but the damp air clung to the narrow streets, thick with the scent of moss, rust, and something fouler beneath. He moved with deliberate steps, each echo a reminder that in this city, debts were never truly paid. They were carved, etched, and sometimes erased. His destination was far from the polished offices and marble halls where the city's ledger system was upheld with rigid formality. Here, in the lower quarters, where desperation gnawed at the bones of those who could not pay, the rules were different. The vanished stone tablet of the victim was no longer just a mystery. It was a threat to the fragile order that kept the city's debts balanced like scales tipping on a knife's edge. Elias's boots splashed through puddles as he navigated the labyrinthine alleys, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Faint murmurs drifted from shadowed doorways, fragments of conversations laced with fear and defiance. A flicker of movement caught his attention, and he paused, catching sight of a figure leaning against a graffiti-stained wall. The man's presence was unmistakable. Silas Reed, enforcer and debt collector, a walking shadow with a reputation as cold and unyielding as the stone tablets themselves. Carr, Silas greeted without warmth, his voice low and gravelly. "You're poking where you shouldn't." Elias met his gaze, unflinching. Someone's been tampering with the ledger. A debt tablet erased. Not just missing erased. The enforcer's eyes narrowed, dark pools reflecting a hint of grudging respect. That kind of erasure, it's not just a mistake. It's a message, and it comes from the top. The words hung heavy between them, charged with implications that reached far beyond this grimy alley. Elias felt the familiar weight of the city's secrets pressing down, the stone-cold certainty that the ledger was more than just a record, it was a weapon. Before Silas could respond further, a figure approached from the shadows. Lena Marsh, her auburn hair damp from the drizzle, eyes sharp and steady despite the danger that clung to the air. "Elias," she said softly, "I've found something. Documents and whispers that don't belong in the open. The victim had ties we didn't expect, ties that could shake the ledger's foundation." Together, they moved to a safer spot, the warm light of Lena's bookstore casting a fragile glow against the night. Inside, the scent of old paper and ink mingled with the tension that wrapped around Elias like a second skin. He spread the fragments across the table, faded photographs, torn letters, ledger entries scrawled in a hurried hand. Each piece told a story of hidden debts, secret alliances, and a corruption that seeped beneath the city's polished surface. Elias's fingers traced the edges of a torn ledger page, the stone metaphor ever present in his mind. The vanished tablet was a break in the city's unyielding facade, a crack through which shadows slipped and secrets festered. He could feel the weight of those unrecorded debts, the cost not just of money, but of trust and truth. The confrontation with Silas and the revelations from Lena painted a grim picture. The victim's death was no isolated incident. It was the symptom of a disease spreading through the very bedrock of the city. Elias knew the path ahead was lined with danger, that each step deeper into the shadows risked more than just his life. It threatened the fragile justice he was sworn to protect. As the night deepened, Elias stood by the rain-streaked window of his office, the city's stone sentinels looming in the distance. Somewhere beneath their cold gaze, the vanished tablet whispered of lies carved deep and debts that could never be fully repaid. And in the silent spaces between stone and shadow, the truth waiting for a man willing to confront it, no matter the cost. The shadows were closing in, but Elias Carr was just beginning to see the shape of the darkness. The rain had been relentless all day, turning the cobblestone streets of the city into slick mirrors reflecting the fractured neon glow of street lamps and faded signs. Detective Elias Carr adjusted the collar of his worn trench coat and stepped through the heavy doors of the city's stone ledger registry, the chill of damp stone walls pressing in around him like a silent accusation. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a faint metallic scent, a reminder of the countless stone tablets that lined the shelves like sentinels of the city's financial sins. Each tablet was a frozen testament to debts owed and paid, carved with care and preserved with reverence, until, that is, they vanished upon repayment, erased from existence like a forgotten whisper. Elias's sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the rows of tablets stacked neatly in their slots, the quiet murmurs of clerks shuffling papers, and the oppressive stillness that seemed to seep from the very walls. He was here to uncover a secret buried beneath the surface of this rigid system, one that defied the permanence of stone itself. Detective Carr, a thin voice interrupted his thoughts. Harold Finch, the city registrar, emerged from a cluster of officials, his gray hair slightly disheveled, and his nervous eyes darting away from Elias's steady gaze. "We've reviewed your request, but as you know, the registries are sacrosanct. Any tampering with the stone tablets is unheard of." Elias cut him off, voice low but firm. "I'm not here for formalities, Finch. The victim's tablet disappeared hours before his death. That's not just unheard of. It's impossible." Finch swallowed hard, glancing toward his assistant, Marla Doone, who stood rigidly by the doorway, arms crossed. "Our records show no such anomaly. If a tablet vanished, it would have been recorded. The system is designed to prevent tampering." "Then someone's lying," Elias said, stepping closer. "Or someone's breaking the rules." The registrar's facade cracked for a moment, the faintest flicker of fear in his eyes. "I assure you, Detective, the ledger system is beyond reproach." Lena Marsh, who had quietly followed Elias into the registry, stepped forward. Her short auburn hair framed a face marked by resolve rather than fear. "Harold, with all due respect, the ledger isn't infallible. We found discrepancies tablets that shouldn't exist, debts that don't add up." Finch's gaze sharpened. "Are you accusing the registry of corruption?" "Not accusing, just suggesting you look harder," Lena replied calmly. "The victim's tablet was forcibly erased. We have witnesses who saw irregularities the night before." Marla Doone's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation. And a serious problem," Elias added. "Because if someone can erase a debt tablet, what else can they erase?" A heavy silence settled. The implication hung in the stale air like a poison. Finch glanced at Marla, then back at Elias and Lena. "I'll review the logs again. But I warn you, Detective, this path could lead to consequences you may not want to face." Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm well aware." Later, in a dimly lit back room cluttered with ledgers and stone fragments, Lena traced her fingers along the worn edges of a ledger. "Look here," she whispered, pointing to an entry that didn't match the official records. "This tablet was marked as repaid, but there's no record of the transaction." Elias leaned in, the flickering light casting shadows that danced across their faces. "A forged repayment. Or an erased one," Lena said softly. "Either way, it's a break in the system's integrity." Outside, the muffled voices of city officials drifted through the hallway, their tone low and guarded. Elias paused, listening to the unspoken threats carried in their words. The system was watching, and it was not pleased. As he stepped back into the rain-slicked streets, a cold wind tugged at his trench coat. He looked up at the flickering street lamps, their light fragile against the dark sky. The stone tablets promised permanence, but beneath their surface lay a network of lies and erasures that threatened to crumble everything. Elias clutched the stone pendant at his neck, feeling the cold smoothness beneath his fingers. The ledger was more than a record of debts. It was a ledger of power, and someone was rewriting the rules. The night stretched on, heavy with unanswered questions and the distant echo of footsteps fading into shadow. Somewhere in the city, a stone tablet had been broken, and the truth was slipping through the cracks. He wasn't sure who to trust anymore. But one thing was clear: the ledger's lies would not stay buried forever. This city's debts, Elias muttered to himself, aren't just numbers carved in stone. They're the chains we all bear, chains some want to break, and others want to keep locked forever. And somewhere, beyond the rain and the shadows, those chains were beginning to snap. But the story was far from over. Elias knew that the deeper he dug, the darker the secrets would become. And as the ledger's lies unfolded before him, he braced himself for the fight that lay ahead. The stone was hard to break, but even stone could be shattered, and the fracture was only just beginning. The rain had stopped just moments before Elias stepped into the dimly lit back room. The tobacco-tinged air, thick with smoke curling lazily toward the stained ceiling. Marcus Vale was already there, a grim shadow hunched over a battered wooden table, the glow of a single lamp casting long, jagged shadows across his weathered face. Elias's trench coat dripped faintly as he closed the door behind him, the muffled sounds of the city's restless night pressing against the thin walls. "You're late," Marcus muttered, eyes not lifting from the scattered papers and fragments of stone tablets between them. "Traffic was hell," Elias replied dryly, sliding into the seat opposite. "Or maybe it was just the city's debts catching up with me." Marcus grunted, the hint of a smirk breaking through his usual stoicism. "You always did have a way with words." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them as palpable as the smoke swirling in the lamplight. They'd been at odds before, two sides of the same tarnished coin, their shared past littered with battles both personal and professional. But tonight, the stakes were different. The city's ledger system, once a symbol of immutable justice, was showing its fractures, and those fractures were bleeding corruption. "What do you have?" Elias asked, leaning forward. Marcus tapped a yellowed document with a thick finger. "More than I'd like. Forged tablets, falsified repayments, officials turning a blind eye or worse. Victor Gray's fingerprints everywhere." "Like a spider's web," Marcus said grimly. "He's not just a debtor turned kingpin anymore. He's the puppeteer." As the rain began again outside, tapping rhythmically against the cracked window panes, Elias felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. The city wasn't just a maze of stone and debts. It was a labyrinth of lies and broken promises, where every vanished tablet was a story erased, every shadow concealing a deeper truth. Later, in the cramped sanctuary of Lina Marsh's bookstore, Elias sifted through piles of documents and fragments of tablets, some cracked, others almost pristine, each telling a fragment of a larger, more sinister narrative. The smell of old paper mixed with the faint scent of stone dust, grounding the moment in the tangible reality of the ledger's power. Lina watched him quietly, her sharp eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "They're hiding more than just debts," she said softly. "Every erased tablet is a silenced voice, a secret paid for in stone." Elias nodded, fingers tracing the ancient glyphs carved into a chipped fragment. "And the deeper we go, the darker it gets." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A shadowy figure slipped inside, pressing a thick envelope into Elias's hand before vanishing into the night like a ghost. The weight of the unknown pressed down on Elias as he unfolded the contents, names, dates, transactions, all pointing to a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the victim's death. Outside, the city hall loomed, its cold stone steps slick with rain, the grandeur of its facade belying the rot beneath. Elias stood there, the chill seeping into his bones, reflecting on the fragile pillars holding the city in place. The ledger system, once a monument to justice carved in stone, was cracking, and with every fissure came the risk of collapse. Marcus's voice broke through his reverie. "We're in deeper than we thought." Elias met his gaze, the dry wit in his eyes tempered by a hard edge of resolve. "Then it's time we dig even deeper." As the night swallowed the city, Elias felt the first true tremors of a battle that would test not only his skills, but his very soul. The cracks in the stone were growing, and with them, the shadows lengthened, promising a reckoning that would leave no ledger unturned and no debt unpaid. But in a city where debts were carved into stone and erased with a whisper, Elias knew one truth above all: some cracks ran too deep to be mended. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the worn lines of his face, and stepped back into the rain-soaked streets, ready to chase the fragile truth before it vanished forever. The city's rain had softened to a persistent drizzle by the time Elias Carr found himself standing before a narrow, soot-streaked apartment building in the older quarter. The air was thick with damp, and the faint scent of stone, the same scent that clung to the countless tablets, etched and mounted across the city's walls. Elias's trench coat, soaked at the collar, did little to shield him from the chill that wasn't just weather-borne, but born from the weight of the case pressing down on him. He had come to see Clara Bell, the victim's estranged sister. She was the last thread Elias had to unravel more than just the mystery of a vanished debt tablet or a cold corpse. Clara was a woman cloaked in silence and shadows, yet she held the key to the man's final days, a window Elias needed to pry open. The building's narrow staircase creaked beneath his boots as he ascended to the third floor. A faint light flickered through the cracked window of apartment 3B, casting long shadows across the peeling paint of the hallway. Elias knocked, the sound sharp against the quiet hum of the city night. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing Clara's tall, slender figure. Her pale face was framed by dark hair, loosely tied back, and her eyes, sharp and wary, flicked over him with an unreadable expression. "Detective Carr," she said, her voice steady but edged with something deeper, perhaps pain or guarded mistrust. "I wasn't expecting you." "I didn't expect to come either," Elias replied, stepping inside. The apartment was cramped and dim, filled with the scent of old books and damp plaster. A single lamp on a cluttered desk cast a warm, flickering glow across the room. Walls lined with faded photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings told stories of a life tangled in history and secrets. Clara gestured for him to sit. "You want to know about my brother," she said, finally breaking the silence that had stretched taut between them, "about his debts." Elias nodded, his gaze steady but gentle. "Anything you can tell me could help." For a long moment, Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening around a worn leather-bound journal on the table. "He was not the man people thought he was," she said quietly. "There were debts, not just financial, but debts of loyalty, debts of betrayal." Her words hung in the air like a stone suspended over a precipice. Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest, a knot of memory and regret that never quite untied. His thoughts flickered to a night years ago, rain slashing the cracked pavement, the violent echo of gunfire, and the lifeless body of his lost friend sprawled beneath a broken stone tablet. That debt had never been repaid, and the stone had never vanished. It was a debt that had followed Elias like a shadow, a weight he bore silently. "What kind of betrayals?" Elias asked, his voice low. Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He trusted the wrong people, trusted the ledger system would protect him. But debts can be hidden, erased, twisted. She told Elias about late-night meetings, whispered threats, and the victim's growing desperation. There were names she wouldn't speak aloud, faces she feared to recall. Yet through her cautious recounting, Elias pieced together a portrait of a man trapped beneath the crushing weight of debts both carved in stone and hidden in shadows. Their conversation stretched deep into the night, each revelation a chisel stroke against the veneer of the city's polished order. Outside, the rain softened to a steady patter against the windowpane, a mournful rhythm that seemed to echo the fragile truths being unearthed inside. In the quiet moments between their words, Elias felt the heavy burden of years pressing down on him. The ledger system was more than a mechanism for justice. It was a cage, and sometimes the keys were in the hands of those who wielded power without conscience. Before leaving, Elias stood by the window, looking out at the city's stone tablets gleaming faintly in the streetlight. Each tablet was a story, a testament to debts owed, promises kept or broken. But some tablets vanished, and with them, the truth. "Thank you, Clara," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You've given me more than I expected." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Be careful, Elias. Some stones, once broken, never mend." Elias stepped back into the rain-soaked night, the city's cold breath wrapping around him like a shroud. The weight of silence was heavier than ever, but beneath it, a flicker of determination burned. The debts were many, the stones fragile, but he would see this through, if only to honor those lost to the unyielding ledger. As he walked the slick streets, Elias's thoughts churned. The city was a labyrinth of secrets, each corner shadowed by debts untold. And in the heart of it all, a truth carved in stone waited to be uncovered. Before it, too, was erased. The night deepened, and with it, the promise that the weight of silence would not hold forever. Elias' car would break through the shadows, no matter the cost. And somewhere, in the distance, a stone tablet waited to be found. The rain had tapered to a drizzle when Elias reached the cafe on the corner, a modest place where the scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the quiet murmur of late-night patrons. He found Clara already seated in a shadowed booth, nursing a cup of black coffee. Her posture was guarded, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging pieces of a puzzle that grew more complex with each word. Clara revealed the victim's mounting debts to shadowy lenders, debts that had been erased from the ledger without a trace, an impossibility that sent ripples through Elias's mind. How could a tablet just disappear? Elias asked, fingers tapping the table in restless rhythm. Someone powerful, Clara replied, voice low. Someone who knows how to bend the rules. The conversation drifted to the victim's fractured relationships, betrayals by those closest to him, debts of trust broken and promises unfulfilled. Each revelation deepened the shadows surrounding the case, pulling Elias further into a world where stone was not just a record, but a weapon. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent to the quiet storm gathering within the cafe walls. Elias felt the weight of it all, the debts, the betrayals, the silence that threatened to swallow the truth whole. He glanced at Clara, seeing not just the victim's sister, but a symbol of the city's fragile hope, a hope that the stones might yet hold the answers they promised. The night stretched on, and with it, the promise of dawn, a dawn Elias was determined to reach, no matter the darkness that lay ahead.